thank you, Terry. This is going to be interesting. Two Terrys we have today. So this is great fun. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, who happens to be one of the finest landscape photographers in the United States, who just happens to live in Hyde Park. It's just amazing for me to have her here today. The prairie and its ecosystem has been really a focus for Terry since about 1978. And she photographs the prairies and the plains of North America and the urban prairie of Chicago as well. What's interesting is she combines aerial and ground photography, as you'll see, and she really delves into the complex relationships between land and people, especially where local people's landscape is at risk, threatened by corporate industrialization. There was a whole series she did on that. It was just phenomenal. I've been following her for a while, as you'll see. She has recently been photographing a particular bur oak tree in the wooded aisle in Jackson Park. So that's going to be interesting to see that newer series. She has exhibited widely. I mean, her vita is just incredible, including one-person shows in major art museums. Now that's a phenomenal honor. If you don't know, if you haven't been involved in museums, but to have one-person shows in major art museums is incredible, including the Art Institute in 1998, where I first saw her work and was just blown away because of its scale and just extraordinary beauty. And the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, the Smithsonian, the Field Museum in 2002, and some of you may have seen that exhibit, the Amon Carter Museum of Art, and others. Her work is also held in museum collections, all the top places, the Museum of Modern Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, the Art Institute, the Nelson Atkins, the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, the National Gallery, the Hirshhorn, and others. I mean, it just goes on. It's fabulous. And so, but, you know, many, photographers and artists will have, catalogs done of their work, and she has many of those. But she also has 5 books, monographs, devoted specifically to her work. One of which I have here is called Heartland, the Photography of Terry Evans, and it's just fabulous. You just have to get a hold of that to take a look at it. And that was published by Yale University Press in 2012. And another one that's more recent was Prairie Stories, that was published in 2013. She has been a Guggenheim Fellow, and she's the recipient of an award that she could probably tell us more about. It's very interesting. It's called the Anonymous is a Woman Award. So we are in for a real treat. And if you haven't seen her work before, or even if you have, this is just going to be fabulous. Please help me give a warm welcome to Terry Evans. Hi, Terry.
Hi. Well, gosh, Rita, thank you so much. I thought my husband was my best fan, but I don't know. I think I have to invite you into that group. Thank you so much. Or rather, we'll make it a group. All right. I think right now, then I'll just simply share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay. All right. So I really had a lot of fun getting ready to show you some of my work, because I decided what would be maybe the most interesting for all of us would be to do work, to show you work that has something to do with where we live. Because most of all, my work is it's about land. And as Rita said, it's about land and people, how people are and land are woven together into landscape. And uh, and that's simply what matters most to me as an artist. So in fact, today, um, here where we are in Hyde Park Village, or in the Hyde Park part of Chicago, is I believe the land where the indigenous people, the first people here, were the Potawatomi. But also there were many tribes that were in the Chicago area, but also the Ojibwe and the Odawa. And so I'm trying to keep that in mind, that there's so much that I don't know that has been left out of photography, um, about um, about the land and the landscape and the people who lived here and who were so deeply connected to this land. And my work goes back as far as early white settlement in some cases. And so I'm going to start with just a few images to show you Kansas prairies. Sam and I moved here from Kansas I think it was about 25 years ago. But I spent 27 years as an adult living in central Kansas, in Salina, Kansas, where we lived. And I spent a lot of that time photographing the Kansas prairies. This is in Chase County, Kansas, in the Kansas Flint Hills. And I spent years, probably 7 or 8 years, looking very closely and deeply at the prairie ecosystem, looking at the grasses and forbs and the tremendous diversity and complexity of a protected prairie. This, even when I started that work in 1978, there was very little untouched prairie left because, as you know, we have turned most of the Great Plains into agriculture or grazing land for beef. This particular prairie was owned privately by a couple north of Salina. Then this is the Kanza Prairie in central Kansas, owned by the Nature Conservancy and Kansas State University. So since the very beginning almost, I have looked very closely at the ground from waist level and then turned to an aerial view. When we moved to Chicago, I met people who were exploring the possibility of transferring the former Joliet Arsenal to the U.S. Forest Service. It was then owned by the Department of the Army. And I met friends, some of whom you may know, George and Vicki Ranney, and the ecologist Jack White, who was doing an ecological survey of the prairie at the Joliet Arsenal. So Joliet Arsenal, as I'm sure you know, it was about 40 miles south of Chicago and was developed in World War II to produce ammunition. And so that ammunition production continued through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and after that it was abandoned. So you may have been there to visit. So here's a cornfield with these ammunition storage bunkers in the middle of it, and the trains that would ship out the ammunition. This was the guardhouse at the beginning. Part of what I really love about looking at prairie is this search for layers of history. And so even looking at this abandoned military site was so fascinating to me. It was so, thoroughly developed. This is the little guardhouse, but I really enjoy looking at abandoned historical sites and trying to understand the stories of what they were in the first place. So this is one of those ammunition storage bunkers close up. You can see it almost looks like a creature to me moving along. Excuse me. This is the Plinimook burial mound, and I didn't know how to photograph it because it looks like the surrounding land, but this is a burial mound that has never been excavated, and horse and cow, I think, are very beautiful in their sort of rain-soaked situation here. But this was my version of the Plinimook burial mound. And then as I came, I had come from Kansas and had been looking closely at the prairie ecosystem. And then I discovered that the Field Museum just down the road was in one part in the herbarium loaded with specimens collected on the prairies and plains in the 19th century. And if you have seen these, which you probably have seen some of them, there's nothing really like holding one of these in your hands and realizing that in some ways you're almost touching the hands of the collector, the botanist who was out on the plains collecting the specimens, bringing them back where they were pressed. And so this one is from July 24th, 1893 in the Sandhills of Nebraska. This is Andropogon, which is, now I just forgot it, the actually most commonly known very tall grass. It's casually called turkeyfoot. Oh, big blue stem, yes. And these sunflowers were found collected on waste ground in Hyde Park in 1899. So Hyde Park wasn't here then, was it? Someone tell me. All right, well, that's maybe for later discussion. But you know, I love this. Maybe it was collected where I live. And this leaf, the same, was also collected in Hyde Park, 1899, maybe by the same collector. I was fascinated by, after I had spent a lot of time photographing plants, I would go to the museum and I had the help of, gosh, a man who lived in Hyde Park, Dr. Oh, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten his name. He helped me. He would open the cabinets and pull out drawers and drawers and drawers of plant specimens. And when I finished with the plant specimens, I wanted to look further at collected prairie specimens. And he introduced me to the curator of birds. And there I also photographed drawers and drawers of birds. And in some ways that was harder than plants. We seem to feel a stronger connection to birds and animals than we do to plants sometimes. And it was hard to think that all of these birds had to be killed in order to be studied and understood. They were never collected, though, in places where it would in any way threaten the population. And then in, let's see, 2004, my friend Jerry Edelman, the director of the Open Lands organization, asked me to collaborate with Open Lands and do an aerial survey of the Chicago region, the 7-county region. And we would have an outdoor exhibition, and it was right at the beginning of Millennium Park. This was an enormous project, and I spent 3 years, and Jerry and I raised a lot of money and met a lot of people to make this happen. And then so I guess we started in 2003, and then in 2005, it was an exhibition in Millennium Park. And it was a book called Revealing Chicago, which is now out of print, but maybe some of you have it. This is one of my favorite pictures from that whole project. You know, one of the things I really love about aerial photography is that I can feel that I'm flying low enough to have a human connection to what's happening on the ground below, especially when I was working on this Revealing Chicago project, because I was always flying in a helicopter because small planes were not allowed to be low over the city. So when I had the show then at Millennium Park, I got an email saying, "I'm the person in the red coat. That white dog is ours." And the red dog just ran up. And so, you know, I had real connections with people from that show. I received a number of emails from people who were actually in the photographs. I also really enjoy the foam on the water here. I had to use a gyro stabilizer because there's so much vibration in the helicopter, and the gyro stabilizer was plugged into a very large and heavy battery that I put on the floor of the helicopter, and it absorbed the vibration so I could get very sharp pictures. So the water intake system and our own Museum of Science and Industry and the Wooded Island, which I'll show you more about the Wooded Island later, Promontory Point. And this is the bridge that Sam and I cross often to head over to the lake. This is a view coming from the lake across the bridge, really at just about this time of year. But, you know, how long ago was that now? Oh my goodness. Anyway, very long. So this picture was made in 2004. And this is at 51st Street. And Washington Park, which you also know. And after I finished that project, I really wanted to explore the steel mills because I kept seeing them as I was taking off to photograph Chicago. And because I always, the pilot would pick me up at the airport down by Gary, and we would fly as we were flying back up north. I would see the steel mills, which I really thought the buildings were so beautiful. And here I just came across this the other day. This is me photographing in Cleveland. The steel mill project expanded, and I photographed steel mills in few other places. But what was so interesting to me, and you know, I almost felt guilty about it at the time because I'm supposed to be a prairie photographer, right? Not a big industry photographer. But what's so fascinating about steel is its ancient history. And I always had this sense of being connected to the earth through this resource that was used to make steel. This is slag processing. And it's so, you know, everything that happens in a steel mill, the extreme heat, the extreme size of what's happening. It always very deeply interesting to me. And then what Rita referred to is I went to North Dakota with, I collaborated with the journalist Elizabeth Farnsworth, and we made about 5 visits to North Dakota to explore what was happening there with in the oil industry and fracking in North Dakota. And I found it very disturbing what was happening there. And I decided that when I finished that project, I wanted to see what kind of environmental disruption could I see if I looked hard enough in Chicago. And this is the oil refinery at Whiting. This, though, is in on the south side of Hyde Park. This is a pile of petroleum coke. So petroleum coke, which was produced by mining the Alberta tar sands, which produces the dirtiest oil. And so it is shipped down to various refineries, and one of them is the refinery at Whiting, where the oil is refined, and then the waste product is called petroleum coke. I'm sure you know this already, but I'm just running through this to bring you to this point in Hyde Park, where the petroleum coke is sent by train over to the southeast side of Chicago along the Calumet River. It's not anymore, it was then. It still passes through there. And it was stored at a site owned by the Koch brothers, who have sites like this all over the country, supporting dirty industries, energy industries. And these white poles were spraying water that supposedly was damping down the pet coke. But in fact, the pet coke was blowing into the neighborhood, which is primarily Latinx neighborhood on the southeast side. And it was getting into their homes and their lungs. This is a train full of pet coke. You can see the cars are not covered. And one of the interesting things about this picture is that, you know, this is where the steel mills were originally. And so this is an abandoned site of a steel mill, you know, now shipping the pet coke through to storage. So I met activists and worked with the activists. We were working, especially they were working. I was photographing and joining them in marches, in meetings, in letters, in protests. And we finally did get the pet coke storage stopped there. And you may have been reading recently. So it seems that activists on the southeast side are fighting for a better quality of air there and a better quality of the whole environment because there's so much industry on the southeast side, and much of it is not meeting proper environmental standards. I'm sure you know what happened the other day is that this latest challenge has been moving the steel recycling over from the north side to the southeast side because people in Lincoln Park didn't want their landscape, their living area polluted. And so they wanted to move it to the southeast side, and the southeast side resisted. And President Biden And the new EPA people have been supporting that and have prevented the final release of that work until further study is done. So, so this is encouraging. This is Jim Kinney and Linda Johnson and Sam Corona, three of the, there was a core group of about 25 activists who really were key in getting the pet coke stopped. However, it's still shipped through there and it now is stored in some other place and affecting that. So when I finished that work about pet coke, I loved doing it. I learned so much. I learned to understand so much of what people on the Southeast side are facing. It was an honor to work with them. But when I got done, I had this longing to see prairie again and to, you know, to really see things that were growing and protected. So I spent a year or two returning to prairies in Kansas and photographing prairies around the Chicago region in southern Indiana and really some very close to Chicago. And after a while, I ended up at the Wooded Island. My friend Sarah Paretsky introduced me to the Wooded Island. I didn't really know about it. And I photographed there a lot. And finally, after photographing there for some months, I discovered this bur oak tree. You may know this bur oak tree. If you've walked over at the Wooded Island there on the southern end of Jackson Park, you can't help but notice this particular tree. And I had spent so many years making single images of prairie and of everything I did. And I had come to feel that that wasn't enough anymore for me. I wanted to tell a story that had more to do with time and more to do with changes in the landscape. And so as an example, let me show you. So up here, I don't know, can you see this on your screen? Oh, wait, that's not what I mean to do. So I don't know if you, can you see my arrow moving? Maybe not. So up here, as you're looking at the picture in the upper left-hand side, the second image down is the very beginning of spring. So for us, that would be, you know, April. This year was an early spring. So this may have been towards the beginning of April. I made this picture in 2019. And then you see down here in the lower right, how very almost bright green that square is. So I made many, many visits to the tree over the course of the beginning of spring to what I thought was becoming summer, till I thought the season was changing. And when I would go, I would simply photograph whatever seemed appealing to me that day about the tree. And then when summer, when it looked like it was becoming summer, I started assembling the images. I worked in Photoshop on my computer. And so till I finally had something that seemed to me to express the spirit of the tree, and also was something that if you were there, you could recognize that this was the same tree. And I like to put something in the pictures I'm doing that shows a human presence. So one day when I was there, I saw this group of bird watchers, and so I put them in the picture. If you go back, if you see that tiny log down at the bottom of the picture on the kind of middle left, there's a robin sitting on that log. So I thought, well, if I have bird watchers, I better have a bird in the picture too. And this is the same bur oak in the summer. So I photographed this many visits over the summer season. And you can see down in the bottom left-hand side, if you look closely, there's a man sitting on a bench reading. You can just see his head through the greenery. And then over here, kind of in the lower right quadrant, you can see my friend Sarah with her dog Kiara. And, you know, it's just, this tree is such a pleasure to visit. And it's already, the green is coming quite early. You know, bur oaks are some of the last to leaf out. But it's already looking gorgeous if you have a chance to go there, or maybe you have been already. You can see down in this sort of middle left bottom, some holes in the leaves. This beautiful bur oak does have, there's Sarah and Kiara. It does have some, a kind of disease, but it's not a life-threatening disease. And the tree is 300 years old. So that tree, and there it is smaller. I wanted to show more of the surrounding environment. That tree was there. It was already, what, 150 years old, something like that, when Frederick Law Olmsted designed the wooded island. And so it was sitting there in what may have been oak savanna at that time. One thing I like about this one, I wanted to show all the, because as you know, the wooded island is it's just beautiful. It's full of interesting trees and plants and shrubbery. And so I wanted to put in as much as I could of the surrounding environment. That middle square is, wait, let me go back. That middle square, the orange one, if I convert the picture to black and white, it completely blends in. You can't tell it's any different than the green because it's the same value. I just enjoyed thinking about that little color theory trick. And this is one of, you can see this down in the bottom middle right, this section. And you see that little ribbon with the hearts on it. I didn't even see that until later when I was working with the pictures. And it reminded me of one of my daughter's hair ribbons when she was very, very young. So that's part of the joy of doing these pictures, is that there are details that I don't see until I start working at home with my computer. So both situations are an exploration for me, both being at home working with a computer and being there walking around. I don't know, did I put, oh no. So this, I wanted to point out, I don't have any separate detail pictures, but over here on this, on the far left, if you look closely, you can see a locust wing that I stuck into the middle of this second from the bottom picture on the far left. That's a wing I found on the sidewalk, and it's clearly much, much bigger than it would be if it were to scale. But I did that for fun. I thought, you know, I want these pictures to be faithful to the tree and the place, but I can put a locust wing in if I want. You know, that locust was probably around there. I actually found it a few blocks away. And there was this old plate, porcelain plate, for this picture. That's my example of human presence, along with this plastic bag of trash hanging from a limb on the bottom right. So I'm going to close with this picture of this. I'm taking you back to Kansas for just a moment, because I made this picture at the beginning of the pandemic. Sam and I have, we own an old farmhouse in Kansas, and that used to belong to Sam's parents. And it's a very special place to us. And at the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of, I was feeling quite anxious, and Chicago had just shut down, and we drove out to Kansas to our farmhouse. And every morning I would wake up and feel fine, and then suddenly have this sudden realization, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and I would feel anxious again. So in the evenings there, we would walk out, and we would walk east to where we could see the sunset. And I started photographing there every evening. And I wanted to show, I realized much later, this movement from the sunset to deep night. And so as you go up, the light changes. And we were there about 6 weeks, in time to see 2 full moons. And you can see 2 full moons in this picture down in the bottom right, and then that black one up in the top middle. And you can actually see Sam, very tiny, being very generous to carry my tripod. And I'm going to close with this one. This is that tiny image. So so this image gave me hope, and now I feel much more hopeful, as I think probably we all do, as this pandemic, as we at least begin to feel like we're beginning to move away from it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry.
So much.
Several people made comments about Hyde Park Village, or Hyde Park. And 1853, I think it was the inception by Paul Cornell. That sounds familiar.
Thank you.
And then it was annexed into Chicago in 1889, I think it was.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So here's one question
Mhm.
from Joe Marlin. He is a photographer himself. Can you talk about the scale of your photographs?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Here's his question. There's another one. What type of camera or cameras have you used? That's from Joe Marlin.
Okay. And also about the scale, or, well, anyway, I'll tell you about the scale anyway, whether you want to know or not. So these last pictures that I showed you that are the multiple image ones are quite large, 30 by 40 inches or 40 by 50 inches when they're on a wall, because I want the viewer to be able to move around almost like they're taking a walk at the place. And for cameras, I don't use film anymore. I do all digital, and I use mainly a Sony A7R, and I also have a Canon digital camera. Canon, I forgot the rest of the title of it. You can tell, I'm more interested in the pictures than the technical part, but it's extremely important to me to have a very good camera, very good quality camera. And my cameras always have been. While I was using film, I was using for years and years a Hasselblad with assorted lenses, and a Mamiya 7 and a panoramic camera that I had, and also a 4x5 camera with sheet film.
And then Rita's question, can you talk about the scale of your photographs?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying about the large ones.
Okay.
My earlier pictures have been printed in multiple sizes, but now they're mostly large.
Here's a question. Have you ever photographed the large tree on the midway just west of Ellis? It's similar to the bur oak on Wooded Island. The person who entered the question says one of my favorite local trees.
Oh, well, thank you. Just a minute. I have to write that down. Okay, no, I haven't. And you said it's, tell me again where it is.
Midway just west of Ellis.
Terry,
Oh,
I
okay.
made the comment. It's a little bit, I'd say it's about a block west of Ellis. It's a great tree, though. It has
Okay.
a branch that goes all the way to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one that's perfect for climbing and sitting on. I have some pictures of my kids sitting up there.
So
not sure
just a minute. So it's midway just west of Ellis, but what is the cross street?
So it's on the northern part of the Midway. So it would be close to 59th Street. It's really big and it's by itself.
Okay, no, I haven't seen it and I'm excited to go visit.
Yeah, I
See it
think you
very
might
soon.
like checking it out.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like it might be a Baroque with it. If it has the low sweeping.
Yes, it looks a lot like the Wooded Island one, so it might be.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Rita also asks, in person, your images have such extreme velvety texture. What type of prints do you use? Also, the Field Museum imagery looks almost like Vellum, a magical series.
Oh, thank you. You know, what was interesting to me about the Field Museum specimens is I had a show of those specimens at the Field Museum, and some of the botanists came and they thought that they were looking at the real specimens instead of photographs. Isn't that fantastic? And but here's what's interesting. This is what I think is most interesting about that, is that in order for them to look that real, they had to be slightly larger than the real specimens. So the real specimens were, you know, about this much smaller, and if like all the way around. And if I printed them that size, they looked smaller than real life. But if I printed them a little larger, they looked like real life. I don't understand that. That's a total mystery. But anyway, I was pleased about that. Oh, I used different kinds of paper over time. Those were printed on paper called Honeymule. And now I use a different paper.
It almost looked like vellum on some of those, because I saw them in person, you know, and they were just magical. They really looked like a medieval manuscript or something. It was just fabulous.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
So Joe,
That's serious.
Marla has another question. There's a wonderful catalpa tree at the south end of Nicholas Park with a very gnarled trunk looking like Atcut might have taken a picture of it if it was in Paris.
Oh, great. And it's Nicholas Park.
Nichols Park, yeah,
Nichols Park.
Catalpa.
Catalpa Park. I mean, Catalpa Tree. Okay.
It's
Okay,
at-
I'll look for
It's at
that.
the south end of the park, at east of Kimbark, east of on 54th Street at a dead end east of Kimbark. But it's very old, and I don't know how intact it is anymore.
Okay, east of Kimbark at 54th. Okay, good. Well, we'll go see it.
Is there a project that you're currently working on now, and or do you do multiple projects at the same time?
I do. Well, historically, I have done multiple projects at this same time. In recent years, I've only been working on one thing at a time, but right now, I actually am working on several things. Let's see. Well, I'll tell you about one thing I'm working on right now, which is it's not photographic, but it's leading to a use of my photography. And it's about what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is that I don't know enough about land use pre-white settlement, you know, particularly of the prairies and plains. That's what I've been looking at. And so I've been spending the past few weeks doing deep research, a lot of reading and making notes and looking at maps. And I've realized that I actually can add information to some of the earlier prairie pictures that I've done. And so I'm doing that in a small way right now by just posting some on Instagram and putting some of the information I'm learning with them. And I'm not sure what all that will lead to, but it's allowing me to look at our plains and prairies in a new way. You know, I used to think that when I was flying over the plains, I knew what I was seeing because I could tell if some land had been plowed, if it had been plowed and abandoned, if it had been overgrazed, if it was healthy, if it was not healthy. And now I'm not so sure that I felt rather smug about that. And now I think I have more to learn. And so I'm interested in understanding more of that, even if the visual clues are no longer there. So I'm working on that. So that's one thing I'm working on right now.
I have a
Mary?
question.
Mary, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Okay. Terry, I wondered if you have tried these wonderful multiple images that we saw with the night sky and with the trees, with a prairie scene. I mean, you did have the one that you showed us with your husband out there and the tripod, but it's like you more recently started with these multiple ones, and when you lived in Kansas, you were not doing that, or
right. You know, at the risk of boring you, I didn't show you very many images, but everything, I've done a couple of books about the prairie, and they were all, you know, like single images, as you know, as we think of them, either close up or distant or aerial. And I just started these multiple image pictures. I started them in 2017 or 18.
oh,
And I have lots about the prairie, but I didn't put them in this show. But if you are interested, you could go to my website online, which is terryevansphotography.com. And there's a list of projects called Ancient Prairies. And if you look at those, you can see the other multiple image prairie pictures, some from around here. So thank you, appreciate that.
Howard Czar had a question you want to ask it, Howard?
Hi, Howard.
Unmute yourself.
Wait, I was muted and I was blind, so. Yeah, I got to experience Terry's photography when she was working on fracking for the Field Museum. That was a pleasure.
Yeah, Howard worked with me. It's very nice to see you here, Howard.
Same here. So you were talking about multiple images. I wondered if you ever worked with 3D images or holography or any of that fancy stuff.
No, it interests me a lot, but I haven't been able personally to move past the flat image. It still interests me so much. So I haven't done that. You know, I have friends who actually do installations in space. I mean, in the space of a room. my friend Ame Bobian and other friends, my friend Alice Hargrave, and that interests me, but I haven't found it calling to me yet.
Mhm.
Josie had a question.
Josie?
Unmute yourself.
Unmute. Sorry.
I have a question.
Okay, you'll be after Josie.
I don't think she knows we can't hear her.
Okay, I'll read her question. Are your books available now?
Oh, yes. The Revealing Chicago one is out of print. And I think maybe my earliest Prairie book, which is called Prairie Images of Ground and Sky, I think that's out of print too. But you can probably find them for a few dollars on online. Any of them you can. I guess, oh, if you look on my website, terryevansphotography.com, there's a list of my books somewhere with
Okay.
pictures of the covers.
Yeah. Okay.
It's somewhere on there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Carol Cross, you had a question?
Yeah, can you look at a picture and tell the difference if it's digital or film? And which do you prefer?
I think there's beauty in both. I think I can tell the difference. Yes, I'm pretty sure I can. And now, after working for many years with digital, I prefer that because I can do so much in my computer. And frankly, I never particularly enjoyed working in the darkroom, even though it was magical in a way. So I guess I prefer digital, but I love my old film pictures and negatives, and I certainly love historical photographs.
Now you can see what's above me. That's a painting on,
Yes.
it's a painting.
Yeah.
It's done on bark paper, handmade. Have you ever done photography on different papers?
I like your painting very much. Yeah, I have experimented on various kinds of paper.
Well, would you like some bark paper? Because I have some that I can give you.
Oh, that's very generous, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't work in my printer. I would like it, but I don't think my printer would like it because it would be kind of uneven. And the surface, I'm afraid it would, my printer would revolt.
Well, if anyone knows an artist
Thank
who would like to experiment on it, I have it.
Okay, where did you get it?
Mexico.
Really?
Well, I've been there for 28 years every year, so I have a lot of things from Mexico.
Oh, that's so
And this artist only uses gouaches or whatever you pronounce it for his watercolors. Actually, this isn't watercolor. It's a Gauche.
Gouache.
Gouache, yeah, which is a kind of watercolor. Yeah. Oh, well, that's really fascinating.
It's a lot better than looking at me.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's fun to
I
see.
guarantee you.
And
Two comments have come through for Terry. Fabulous. Thank you, Terry. Another one,
thank you.
fascinating, very original. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Well, I will close this time by saying a couple things. This Zoom drop-in will be available in the next couple of weeks for members on the Hyde Park Village website. So if you want to see it again and linger over a picture, you can do that. See it again, or if tell another member if they could watch it for the first time. We'll also make those announcements in our e-blast newsletters that come out. I do want to be sure and remind us about our next drop-in, which is on Wednesday, May the 26th. And the title is Hidden Treasures Found in Chicagoland Cemeteries, Photos and Stories by Mary Ann McDermott, who's Professor Emerita at Niehoff School of Nursing, Loyola University, Chicago. So see more about that and join us. And I think that's it.
Can I just thank Terry so much for doing this incredible presentation? It just was just fabulous. And I would want to direct people who are interested in your work to your, are you still with Catherine Edelman Gallery?
Yes.
Yeah, so her work is represented by them, and it's just extraordinary to see them in person and see the scale of these works. It's just quite an experience.
Oh, thanks a lot, Rita.
Again.
And
Thanks.
thanks to all of you for coming and listening and watching. I appreciate it.
Wait, I have one more question that's important. That is there any buildings that have bought your photos to put in their hallways and offices?
Well, quite a few in Chicago, really, but often I don't know who they are. They're purchased through the Catherine Edelman Gallery often. I could say one I know of, there are several large pieces in the Federal Reserve Building.
Well, maybe that could be, you could think of them and put it in the newsletter. So if we want to see them, we can do so.
Oh, well, thank you. But the reason I can't think of them is that I don't know them mostly.
Oh.
They're in lots of office buildings around Chicago.
It's a shame.
I don't know where.
Carol, I'll have to take you to Catherine Edelman Galleries.
Is that where they are?
Yes,
Do you have to wear a mask?
yes. Oh,
Where is
such
the gallery?
pardon me?
Where is that gallery?
Oh, it's on
Superior,
Chicago Avenue.
Chicago Avenue.
Yeah.
Not Superior?
They moved. It's on, it's around 1700 West Chicago, something like that.
Oh, they have moved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to look it up, but I won't take your time to do that. Anyway,
But thank you again.
This was
Real treat.
So
Thanks.
Catherine Edelman is at 1637 West Chicago Avenue. We can,
oh, okay.
yeah, we can maybe include that, Michelle, with a follow-up
Yeah,
email
when
about
I,
the
when I
drop-in.
shoot the video, I'll include that at the address and information. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Terry, it was great.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
everybody who was involved in organizing this as well as Terry.
Yes. Yes, yes.